Okay, so let's set the scene. Imagine this. You're stepping off a ship, it's 1798, you're in Calcutta, the air is thick, it's humid, it's bustling, and well, you're this guy, Richard Wellesley, short in stature, but with an EO the size of a planet. And you look at this whole chaotic chessboard of India, right, that the British East India Company is just one of the players, sort of scrambling for a foothold. And you just decide, nope, this whole trading and surviving thing, that's over.
It's a fundamental shift in mindset. He decides right then and there that he is going to change the very nature of the British presence.
Exactly. He's not interested in a British Empire in India. He wants a British Empire of India. He even gives himself this ridiculously over-the-top nickname, the Bengal Tiger.
It's a nickname that history remembers well, and that subtle shift in prepositions you mentioned, from in to of, that carries the weight of an entire century of colonial history. We are talking, of course, about Richard Colley Wellesley, the Marquess of Wellesley.
And today, we're unpacking the legacy of this self-proclaimed tiger. We're going to get into how he used, military force, these diplomatic traps that are just diabolically clever, and just sheer audacity to completely redraw the map of India.
We're really going to dig into this Subsidiary Alliance system, which it sounds a bit dry and boring, but it was an absolute stroke of imperial genius.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
And then there's the final bloody showdown with Tipu Sultan and the beginning of the end for the mighty Maratha Confederacy.
It's arguably the most pivotal moment in that transition from trade to empire. I mean, before Wellesley, you could argue the British were merchants with muskets. After Wellesley, there's no question. They were the paramount power.
But before we unleash the tiger, we have to welcome all of you listening. This is a special deep dive tailored specifically for the Simplified UPSC by PTP community. So whether you're, driving to work, hitting the gym, or sitting down with your notes, we are so hyped to be walking you through this crucial chapter of history.
Absolutely. And, just a humble request to everyone listening right now. If you find value in this deep analysis, if these breakdowns are actually helping you connect the dots for your prep, please take a second and subscribe to the Simplified UPSC by PPP channel. It really does support the creation of this content and helps us reach more learners just like you.
It makes a huge difference. And if you are capable, and we know not everyone is, so only if you are, and you want to see us keep diving deep into these really dense topics, maybe consider supporting the show on Patreon. And on that note, a massive shout out to all our current supporters. You guys are the fuel in our engine. Seriously, we could not do this without you.
We really couldn't.
And please don't forget to like the video and leave a valuable comment. It helps with the algorithm, sure, but honestly, more importantly, we love hearing your take on these historical twists and turns.
Also, a quick resource announcement before we really get into it. If you're scrambling for notes while you're listening, just stop. Don't worry about it. We've got free notes with practice previous year questions or PYQs, and they're available right now on the public Telegram channel.
But if you want the VIP treatment, and I'm talking access to all the videos in this series at once, organized premium notes, really detailed breakdowns, extra PYQs, and model mains answers that are basically cheat codes for your exam prep, you need to join the private Telegram library.
And how do they do that?
It's simple. Just DM on the public Telegram channel to join. And trust me, for the mains preparation, those model answers are absolute gold.
They are indeed. So shall we get to the roadmap for today?
Let's do it. We're dissecting Chapter 3 of the Tamil Nadu Board Class 12 history book. The focus is strictly on the Marquess of Wellesley, Governor-General from 1798 to 1805. We'll break this down into, first, the state of India when he arrived, the absolute chaos of 1798.
Then his masterstroke, the Subsidiary Alliance.
Then the fall of Mysore, and finally, the wars with the Marathas. It's a packed timeline.
It is, a lot of moving parts. So let's jump right into part 1, the stage in 1798.
Okay, so paint the picture for us. Wellesley arrives in India. Now, we often look back at history with, 20/20 hindsight and think the British takeover was just inevitable. But in 1798, was it? Was he walking into a calm, well-ordered situation where the British were already the bosses?
Not at all. Far from it. If you were a betting person in 1798, you wouldn't necessarily put all your money on the British. Wellesley is walking into a situation that's incredibly precarious, arguably the most dangerous moment for the British since the Battle of Plassey, really. You have to understand the political condition of India at that exact moment.
Precarious.
Yeah.
But they had money, they had modern army, they had guns. What was so dangerous?
But they didn't have security. They were surrounded. Look at the map through Wellesley's eyes for a second. It's like a ring of fire. In the northwest, you had this huge looming threat from Zaman Shah of Afghanistan.
Afghanistan again. It feels like in every single chapter of Indian history, there's a threat coming down from the Khyber Pass.
It is a recurring theme, isn't it? And Zaman Shah was powerful, he was aggressive, and he was posing a very serious threat. He was making a lot of noise about sweeping down into the plains of India, maybe to restore Muslim power, maybe just to plunder. For the British, sitting in Bengal, that's a terrifying prospect.
Okay, so you got the Afghans knocking on the door in the north. What about the rest of the map? What's happening in the heart of India?
Well, in north and central India, you have the Marathas. And they were still an absolutely formidable power. They weren't just a single kingdom, they were a confederacy. You had the Peshwa in Pune, Scindia in Gwalior, Holkar in Indore, Barnsley in Nagpur.
A whole network.
A whole network. And even though, and this becomes crucial later, they had internal dissension brewing, militarily they were a machine. I mean, they had French-trained artillery, they had massive cavalry forces. They were, without a doubt, the heavyweight champions of the subcontinent at that time.
And what about down south?
Down south, you have the old enemy, Tipu Sultan, the Tiger of Mysore.
He was still around. I thought Cornwallis had dealt with him in the previous war.
Dealt with him, yes. Defeated him, took half his territory. But Cornwallis didn't destroy him. Tipu was still very much active. And he was an absolutely uncompromising enemy. He was licking his wounds, he was rebuilding his army, and he was actively, desperately looking for allies to kick the British out of India once and for all.
So Wellesley is effectively surrounded. You have Afghans in the north, Marathas in the center, Tipu in the south.
Exactly. But the biggest threat, at least in Wellesley's mind, wasn't even an Indian one. It was European.
Ah, of course.
You have to remember, 1798 is the absolute peak of the Napoleonic Wars in Europe. Britain and France are locked in this global struggle for survival.
The French connection. It always comes back to the French.
It was huge. I mean, think about it. The Nizam of Hyderabad, who was supposed to be a British ally, was actually employing Frenchmen to train his army. Thousands of them. And Napoleon Bonaparte himself had just invaded Egypt. He was dreaming of an eastern invasion, of linking up with someone like Tipu and marching on India. Wellesley was absolutely terrified of French influence linking up with Indian princes.
So to Wellesley, this wasn't just some local colonial squabble. This was a theater of a world war playing out on Indian soil.
Precisely. And to make matters even worse, the British position had been actively weakened by the guy who came right before Wellesley.
Oh, who that?
A man named Sir John Shore. He was the Governor General just before Wellesley from 1793 to 1798. And his policy was known as non-intervention or, neutrality.
Non-intervention. That sounds sensible, doesn't it? Don't get involved in other people's wars, save money, focus on trade.
On paper, it sounds very prudent. And the directors of the East India Company back in London, they loved it. Because, wars are incredibly expensive and trade is profitable. But in the brutal reality of 18th century Indian politics, it was an absolute disaster.
It backfired. How?
Completely. You have to understand that in this era, prestige was power. Your reputation as a reliable ally or a fearsome enemy was your currency. By refusing to intervene, by just sitting on the sidelines while Indian states fought each other, the British seriously damaged their own prestige.
So they looked weak.
They looked weak and unreliable. It fostered anti-British feelings because states that thought they were allies felt abandoned. And crucially, it allowed their rivals, like the Marathas and Tipu, to grow stronger without any kind of check from the British.
So Sir John Shore's policy basically created a power vacuum. And vacuums in politics are always filled by chaos.
That's a perfect way to put it. It created political unrest across the board. So when Wellesley lands, this is the mess he inherits. He sees a loss of British prestige, he sees this looming French threat everywhere, and he looks at the Indian states and sees them as engines of what he called tyranny and corruption.
That's a classic colonial justification, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're corrupt and chaotic, so we have to rule them for their own good.
It is the white man's burden logic before Kipling even wrote the poem. So Wellesley arrives with two very clear twin aims. One, the preservation, or really the restoration, of British prestige. He wanted to make it crystal clear to everyone that the British were the top dogs.
And two.
And two, the complete and total removal of the French danger from India. He was obsessed with it.
So his strategy is the exact reverse of Sir John Shore.
180 degrees. He completely reversed the policy of non-intervention. He was convinced that only a strong, dominant British power could control the Indian states and stabilize the region. He wasn't here to trade, he was here to rule.
Which brings us to his tool of choice. He didn't just use cannons and muskets, he used a contract. the Subsidiary Alliance system. Let's unpack this in part 2, because this is probably the most famous or infamous thing associated with Wellesley. What exactly is this system?
It's a fascinating and, frankly, a brilliant piece of diplomatic machinery. Now, it wasn't entirely new. Some of his predecessors, like Clive or even Cornwallis, had used similar kinds of arrangements on an ad hoc basis. But Wellesley, he took the idea, he expanded it, and he consolidated it into a specific, repeatable system. He basically industrialized the concept of the client state.
It's like he created a franchise model for imperialism.
That is a very, very apt analogy. So let's look at the rules of the game, the terms and conditions, if you will. If you're an Indian ruler and you sign a subsidiary alliance with Wellesley, here's what you're agreeing to.
Okay, laid it out for me.
First, the troops. You, the Indian ruler, who is now called the protected state, you must maintain a contingent of British troops within your own territory.
Okay, so I've got a foreign army living in my backyard. That seems uncomfortable. Who pays for them? Surely not the British.
Haha, definitely not. You do. That's the second rule, the cost. The ruler must pay for these troops. And Wellesley was very clever here. He knew that Indian princes often ran out of cash. So the deal was, you can pay us in cash subsidies, a big annual payment.
Or, there's an or.
There's an or. Or if you can't make the payment, you just cede or give up a part of your territory to the British, and they'll collect the revenue from that land to pay for the troops permanently.
Wait a minute. That feels like a debt trap waiting to happen. Oh, you can't pay the monthly bill. No problem. I'll just take this entire province off your hands.
It was absolutely a debt trap, and it worked time and time again. Okay, rule 3, the resident. A British officer called the resident is stationed at your court.
So, like an ambassador.
Ostensibly, yes, he's an ambassador, but in reality, he becomes the real center of political power in your kingdom. He's the eyes and ears of the governor-general. He's advising you on policy. He's reporting everything back to Calcutta.
So I have their army in my land, I'm paying for it, and now I have their spy living in my court. This is sounding worse and worse. What about my other friends? Can I don't know, call up the French if I get lonely?
Absolutely not. And that is the fourth and perhaps the most critical rule of all. Foreign policy is surrendered. The protected state cannot have relations with any other power, whether it's another Indian state or a foreign one, without British permission. And the treaty specifically says no employing other Europeans.
So no Frenchmen. That was the real target.
That was the bullseye. Get the French out of every court in India.
So let me get this straight. I give up my army, my money, my land, and my foreign policy. What on earth do I get in return for all that?
You get safety. You get protection. The British, who now style themselves the paramount power, promise to defend you from any external aggression. And this is a really key part. They also promise to protect you from internal revolt.
Internal revolt. That's interesting. So you're saying if my own people hate me because I'm a terrible ruler and they try to overthrow me, the British army will step in and crush the rebellion to keep me on the throne.
Exactly. And that right there leads us directly to the strategic analysis of this whole system. We need to look at this from both sides. For the British, this was, without question, the master stroke of imperialism.
It sounds perfect for them. It's all upside.
It was. Just think about the Demerits for the East India Company. They massively increased their military strength, but the Indian princes were the ones paying the bill. They kept the ravages of war away from their own territories because any fighting would now happen in these buffer states. And most importantly, it completely neutralized the French threat. You can't have a French general advising an Indian prince if that prince's treaty explicitly forbids it. It's genius.
But for India, this sounds absolutely catastrophic.
It was devastating in the long run. The defects or the demerits of the system were severe and wide-ranging. First, let's just talk about the soldiers. Unemployment and anarchy.
What do you mean?
Well, when a state like Hyderabad signed the alliance, they had to disband their own large native armies to make room for the British contingent and to save money. So suddenly you have tens of thousands of professional soldiers with no job and only one skill: fighting.
And they don't just go home and take up farming quietly, I imagine.
No, of course not. Many of them joined these large marauding bands of what were called pendaris, basically freebooters, mercenaries, or bandits, who started menacing central India for decades. They became a massive source of instability that the British themselves had created.
Wow. Okay, so that's the soldiers. What about the rulers themselves? You mentioned that protection from internal revolt.
This is the real psychological damage. It led to what historians call the demoralization of the princes. Just think about it for a second. If you're a king and you're protected from external invasion by the powerful British army, and you're also protected from internal revolt by that same army, why would you even bother to govern well?
Right. There's absolutely no consequence for being a bad king. The normal checks and balances are gone.
Exactly. The fear of your neighbors invading or your own people rebelling is what keeps rulers, to some extent, in check. You take that away, and the princes lost all incentive to govern effectively. They became what contemporary accounts called pleasure-seeking. They spent their time in their harems and on lavish luxuries while the administration of their state collapsed. This led to massive misgovernment.
And let me guess, the British then used that very misgovernment as an excuse later on.
You're jumping ahead, but yes, that's exactly what happened. It was a vicious cycle, a trap. The system first drained the state treasuries because of the heavy subsidies, the famous economic drain of India. Then the resulting misrule often became the perfect justification for the British to eventually annex the state completely. They'd say, oh, look how badly you're governing. Your people are suffering. For their own good, we must take over.
So it's a system designed to fail the user and benefit the provider. It creates the very problem, bad governance, that the British then claim they have to step in and solve.
Precisely. It was, in many cases, just a preparation for eventual annexation, a stepping stone from indirect control to direct rule.
Unbelievable. Let's look at how this actually played out in the real world. Part 3. Enforcement. Who's the first to fall into this beautifully designed net?
The first major state was Hyderabad. The Nizam of Hyderabad was the very first to accept the system in 1798.
1798, that's the year Wellesley arrived. He did not waste any time at all.
None whatsoever. He hit the ground running. It started as a sort of ad hoc measure, mainly to get rid of the French troops that the Nizam was employing. The French were promptly disbanded, and a British subsidiary force replaced them. But by 1800, they signed a new, more permanent treaty. Under this treaty, the Nizam ceded large, valuable territories, which became known as the ceded districts, to pay for the force permanently.
So Hyderabad is secured, locked into the system. Who's next on Wellesley's list?
Next up is Oudh, or Awadh, in northern India. And this is a classic example of Wellesley's pressure tactics. The pretext he used was that threat we mentioned earlier, Zaman Shah of Afghanistan. Wellesley went to the Nawab of Oudh and said, "You're in grave danger. Zam Shah might invade. You need more of our protection."
Right. The classic line, nice kingdom you have here. It'd be a shame if someone invaded it.
It's essentially a protection racket. Wellesley forced a new treaty on the Nawab. The Nawab had no choice but to surrender some of his richest, most fertile lands places like Rohilkhand, the lower Doab, Gorakhpur. And to add insult to injury, the British gained the right to directly interfere in Oudh's internal administration to maintain law and order.
That phrase, law and order, it just does so much heavy lifting in colonial history, doesn't it?
It's a catch-all for doing whatever we want.
Okay, so Hyderabad and Oudh are two of the big ones. What about the smaller states?
He mopped them up systematically. You have Tanjore in 1799. There was a succession dispute after the ruler died. Wellesley stepped in, acted as the kingmaker, resolved it in favor of his preferred candidate, Sir Foji II, and then immediately made him sign a treaty.
And what did that treaty do?
The British took over the entire administration of Tanjore. Sir Foji was allowed to retain his royal title, and he got a handsome pension, but his political power was gone.
Sir Foji II? Wait, isn't he the one associated with that famous library? That name is ringing a bell.
Yes. That is a great cultural note to highlight, especially for our listeners studying for the art and culture section of the exam. Raja Sir Foji II was a man of immense culture and learning. He was actually a disciple of the German missionary Christian Friedrich Schwarz, and he's the one who built and expanded the incredible Saraswati Mahal Library in Tanjore. It's a treasure trove of ancient manuscripts. So while he lost his political power to Wellesley, he left this massive, lasting cultural legacy.
I love that detail. It reminds us these weren't just abstract names on a treaty. They were real people with their own passions and legacies. Okay, so Tanjore is gone. Who else?
Surat followed in 1799 as well. Very similar story. The local Nawab died, the British intervened in the succession, and they ended up taking over the administration entirely from his brother, leaving him with just a title and a pension. And then the big one in the south, the Carnatic, in 1801.
The Carnatic seems really complicated. I've read about this double government system there causing a lot of problems.
It was an absolute mess. The people were suffering under this confusing system where authority was divided between the Nawab and the company. It was inefficient and corrupt. Wellesley was looking for an excuse to end it, and he found one. He claimed to have discovered secret correspondence between the late Nawab, Umar-ul-Umara, and Tipu Sultan.
So he accused him of treason.
Treason against the company, yes. He used this as leverage. When the Nawab died, there was a succession struggle. His legal heir, Ali Hussein, refused to just retire and become a pensioner. So Wellesley simply bypassed him, declared the throne vacant, and signed a treaty with a more pliable nephew, Azim-ud-Dawla.
And the result?
The result was the complete takeover. The entire military and civil administration of the Karnataka was transferred to the British. It was effectively annexed.
He really was systematically turning the map pink, one state at a time, mostly without firing a shot. But there was one man who refused to sign, one man who would never become a pensioner. Tipu Sultan.
Which brings us to part 4. The Fourth Anglo-Mysore War, 1799. This is the great showdown.
Now, Tipu had already lost the Third War pretty badly, right? He lost half his territory to Cornwallis and his sons were taken hostage.
He did, but Tipu was incredibly resilient. He was burning with a desire to avenge that humiliating defeat at the Treaty of Seringapatam. For him, it was personal, so he was actively engaging in international diplomacy. He was sending emissaries everywhere, seeking help from France, Arabia, Kabul, even Turkey.
And it's the French connection that really scared Wellesley, right?
It terrified him. It was his worst nightmare coming true. In 1798, there was confirmed correspondence between Tipu and the French revolutionary government in Paris. And here's a detail that really highlights the strangeness and the global nature of the times. A Jacobin club was started at Seringapatam, Tipu's capital.
A Jacobin club.
Yeah.
Like the radical revolutionaries in Paris who were, chopping off the heads of aristocrats.
Yeah.
In Mysore.
The very same. They planted a tree of liberty in his capital. They hoisted the flag of the French Republic. And remember, Napoleon is in Egypt at this very moment. He actually sent a friendly letter to Tipu, addressing him as Citizen Tipu. To Wellesley, this looked like a global anti-British conspiracy with Tipu Sultan at its Indian center.
So from Wellesley's perspective, Tipu had to go. There was no other option.
No other option. So he revived the concept of the Triple Alliance that had been used against Mysore before. The British, the Nizam, and the Marathas. The Nizam, now a loyal subsidiary ally, joined in immediately. The Marathas, busy with their own internal squabbles, promised to remain neutral, which was good enough for Wellesley.
And the war itself, how did it play out?
It was incredibly short and decisive, a real blitzkrieg for its time. It was a classic pincer movement. The Bombay Army, under General Stuart, attacked from the west. The Madras Army attacked from the east. And interestingly, the Madras Army was led by the Governor-General's own younger brother, Arthur Wellesley.
Arthur Wellesley.
Yeah.
That name sounds really familiar. He becomes a big deal later, doesn't he?
He would later become the Duke of Wellington, the man who defeats Napoleon himself at the Battle of Waterloo. But here, in 1799, he's a young general cutting his teeth in the fields of Mysore. The two armies converged on Tipu's capital and forced him to retreat behind its walls.
The climax. The siege of Seringapatam.
The fall of Seringapatam is one of the most dramatic events in Indian history. The British breached the walls and the fighting was fierce, street to street. But Tipu Sultan didn't hide in his palace. He didn't try to surrender. He was out there on the ramparts leading his men. And he was shot dead, defending his capital to the very last, a warrior's death.
So with Tipu gone, what happened to the kingdom of Mysore? Did the British just annex all of it?
Not all of it. Wellesley was too clever for that. He engineered a settlement. The core of the old kingdom was restored to the ancient Hindi dynasty that Tipu's father had overthrown, the Wodeyars. A young boy, Krishnaraja III, was placed on the throne.
But I'm guessing he had to sign a Subsidiary Alliance treaty.
Oh, of course. That was the first order of business. So Mysore became another client state. The rest of Tipu's former territory was then divided between the British and their ally, the Nizam, and Tipu's family, his sons. They were packed off and sent to the fort of Vellore.
Which I have a feeling will become important later on in our series. But for now, the Tiger of Mysore is gone. That leaves one big player on the board. The last piece of the puzzle. The Marathas.
Part 5. The struggle with the Marathas. This was the last great Indian power standing outside the subsidiary system. The final boss, if you will.
But the Marathas were so strong, so sprawling. Why did they crumble so quickly when their turn came?
It really starts with a death. A man named Nana Fidnavis died in 1800.
Who was he? Why was his death so important?
He was, for lack of a better term, the brain of the Maratha Confederacy, a brilliant statesman. He was the one voice of wisdom and unity who could keep the powerful, ambitious Maratha chiefs in line. When he died, the last restraint was gone, and the Maratha chiefs almost immediately started fighting among themselves.
So a civil war.
Essentially, yes. You had the Peshwa Bajirao II, who was the nominal head of the Confederacy, but was let's just say politically incompetent and weak,
Ah.
and he was caught in this bitter power struggle between two of the most powerful chieftains, Jaswant Rao Holkar and Dalat Rao Scindia.
Holkar versus Scindia versus the Peshwa. A three-way cage match for control of the Maratha Empire?
Exactly. And it all came to a head at the Battle of Poona in 1802. Holkar completely defeated the combined forces of Scindia and the Peshwa.
So the Peshwa, the supposed head of the Marathas, gets beaten on his own turf. What does he do?
He does the unthinkable. He runs. He fled from his capital, Poona, and went to the British at Bassein. And there, to save his own skin, he signed a subsidiary treaty with them. This is the infamous Treaty of Bassein of 1802.
Let me guess. It was a full-blown subsidiary alliance.
It was. The Peshwa accepted British troops, surrendered territory for their upkeep, and gave up his foreign policy. But the significance is just huge. The British now officially recognized him as the head of the Maratha kingdom, and they were treaty-bound to restore him to power. Maratha foreign policy effectively passed into British hands.
So the leader of the Marathas is now a British puppet.
Correct. For Wellesley, this is what he called his crowning triumph. But for the other Maratha chiefs like Scindia and Bonsal, this was seen as an absolute surrender of national honor and independence. They couldn't accept it.
So war is now inevitable. The Second Maratha War, 1803 to 1805.
It had to happen. Scindia and Bonsal, the Raja of Berar, immediately united their armies to challenge the British and defy the Treaty of Bassein.
Who are the key commanders in this war?
You have Arthur Wellesley again leading the campaign in the south, in the Deccan. He defeated the combined Maratha forces at two very famous, very bloody battles, Bassein and Argonne. Meanwhile, up in the north, another British general, Lord Lake, launched a brilliant campaign. He captured Delhi and Agra.
He captured Delhi. That means, what about the Mughal emperor?
Yes. Lord Lake took the old, blind Mughal emperor, Shah Alam II, under British protection. This is symbolically massive. The British, not the Marathas, are now the guardians of the Mughal throne. The fiction of Mughal sovereignty would continue, but the reality was that the British were in charge.
The Marathas must have been reeling from these defeats on two fronts.
They were crushed. The war was a disaster for them. Bonsal was the first to give in. He signed the Treaty of Diogan, where he ceded the entire province of Cuttack, which is modern-day Orissa. Then Scindia signed the Treaty of Surgi Arjungaon, giving up huge territories. And of course, both of them were forced to accept subsidiary treaties.
So that's it. Game over for the Marathas.
Not quite. There was one chief left standing, Holkar.
The guy who started all the trouble at the Battle of Poona.
The very same. He had cleverly remained aloof from the war at first, watching Scindia and Bonsal get defeated. But then he made some extreme demands on the British, and war was declared against him. And here, for the first time, Wellesley's winning streak hit a bit of a speed bump.
Really? The British struggled against Holkar.
They did. Holkar was a brilliant guerrilla tactician. Some of the English generals committed serious blunders. One British detachment was even wiped out. For a time, Holkar remained unsubdued. It was a rare check on Wellesley's otherwise string of incredible successes.
Even tigers have their limits, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, but before we summarize his overall legacy, let's do what our simplified UPSC listeners are really waiting for. Part 6. PYQ linkage and critical analysis. Let's connect all this back to the exam.
Absolutely. Let's connect these events directly to what you might see on the test papers.
First up, let's talk about a question from the 2020 prelims. There was a specific question about Fort William College. What's the story there?
Yes, that's a great example. The question asked why Wellesley established Fort William College in Calcutta, and the answer is straightforward, but incredibly important for understanding his mindset. It was to train British civilians, the young men coming out to be civil servants, in Indian languages, law, and customs for administrative purposes.
Why does that matter in the context of our whole story today? What does it show?
It shows that Wellesley wasn't just conquering land, he was building an administration to rule it. He realized that if the British were going to have an empire of India, not just in India, their officials couldn't just be clueless traders. They needed to understand the language and culture of the people they were going to govern. It connects directly to that broader theme of consolidating administration, not just grabbing territory. It's about long-term rule.
Excellent point. Okay, what about chronology? The Maratha Wars can be a real blur of treaties and dates. It seems like a classic trap for a prelims question.
It's a very common trap. You absolutely must remember the correct order of events. First, you have the internal Maratha conflict culminating in the Battle of Poona. That leads the Peshwa to flee and sign the Treaty of Bassein in 1802. Then, as a result of that treaty, the Second Maratha War starts in 1803. Then, after the defeats, you get the treaties of Diogoan and Sergi Argingoan.
So Bassein caused the war. It wasn't a result of it.
Precisely. If you mix up the order of the Treaty of Bassein and the war, you lose the entire cause and effect relationship, and you'll almost certainly get the question wrong.
Got it. Okay, now let's zoom out. The big picture. What is the final estimate of Wellesley? How do historians view him?
He is often called the greatest empire builder for the British in India, and it's hard to argue with that title. Just think about the map when he arrived in 1798 versus when he left in 1805. He fundamentally converted the company from a primarily trading corporation that held some territory into a full-blown imperial power.
He also created the Madras Presidency as we know it, right?
Yes, by annexing the Carnatic and Tanjore and adding the territories taken from Tipu, he essentially formed the modern Madras Presidency. And in the north, with the lands taken from Oudh and the Marathas, he created what became the province of Agra. He was an architect of the British Raj.
Who followed him? What happened immediately after he left?
He was recalled in 1805, partly because his wars were so expensive. He was followed by Sir George Barlow for a couple of years, a much quieter period, though it was marred by the Vellore Mutiny, which we'll cover later. And then after him came Lord Minto.
Okay, let's wrap this up with our outro.
To summarize it all, Wellesley found the British Empire in India in a really precarious position. It was threatened by the French, by Tipu Sultan, and by the Marathas. He left it, without a doubt, as a paramount power in the subcontinent, having neutralized the French, destroyed Tipu, and broken the back of the Maratha Confederacy.
But here is a final provocative thought for all of you to mull over as you go about your day. We talked about how the Subsidiary Alliance made Indian princes pleasure-seeking and corrupt because they were protected from their own people.
Right. It removed all accountability.
So here's the question. Did the Subsidiary Alliance actually weaken India more through the military defeat of its armies, or through the slow moral corruption of its rulers who no longer had to fear for their thrones or answer to their people? Which damage was more lasting? The lost battle, or the lost art of governance?
That is a very deep and important question. The hollowing out of governance from within, the decay of institutions, that can often be far more destructive in the long run than a single lost battle.
Something to think about. All right, community time. A massive final reminder to join the private Telegram library for those premium notes. We are talking detailed breakdowns, extra PYQs, and those all-important model mains answers.
And just a reminder, the instruction is to DM on the public Telegram channel to join. And please, if you are in a position to, consider supporting us on Patreon to help keep this series alive and kicking.
A final huge shout out to all our supporters, and don't forget to like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to Simplified UPSC by PPP.
We will catch you in the next deep dive into history.
Signing off.